Hello, this is Catherine Lewis, and I'm putting together the video for part 1 of Unit 2 for your mastery unit on rhetorical analysis, the LIDDS unit. And there's a couple things we just kind of wanted to take care of at the beginning for clarification. I've drawn here a little umbrella with the word metaphor in it, and under the umbrella are all the things that are kind of falling under the category of metaphor. Simile, idiom, analogy, personification, and most imagery. This means that a simile is a type of metaphor, but a metaphor isn't a simile because there's no like or as. Idiom is a metaphor that is so commonplace that we call it an idiom. We all know it. An analogy can be metaphorical, so it falls under this umbrella. Personification is also metaphorical. And most imagery will be metaphorical, but not all. So there's a couple things to consider as you're thinking about what you're going to label something. If there's any confusion, hopefully we can cover that in class or as I go through the modeling for you today. Alright, I also have a graphic organizer to explain the relationship of syntax and parallelism. Syntax is the sentence's structure, how a sentence is structured. When we're looking at syntax, a lot of times we're trying to determine what the author is doing as far as length of the sentences and how they are using long and short sentences. The use of rhetorical questions can be a syntax device because of the question that is being asked. Other things that we talk about when we talk about syntax are use of punctuation. Did the author choose to use a question mark? Are they using exclamation points? Are they using semicolons? Are they using colons or dashes? Any of that can be syntax. Another type of syntax, which is a new word for you, is parallelism. And so I have again drawn an umbrella because these, our new vocabulary words, are types of parallelism. Okay. And so they all fall under that structure of parallelism. There are many other types of parallelism, but here are 3 that we want to start out with. Okay, so you should be looking at a copy of a speech by Sojourner Truth called Ain't I a Woman? And we're going to look at this and start looking for our LIDDS again: language, imagery, diction, details, and syntax. Last time we talked about LIDDS and how they can be used for analysis, we were mostly talking about imagery, diction, and details. We're going to expand that and talk about language and syntax as well. So you're going to need to find 5 different colored markers. You can use the same that I have. I've got a blue pen for language, pink highlighter for imagery, yellow highlighter for diction, green highlighter for details, and a red pen for syntax. So you're going to want to follow along with me and fill out as I do, as I model how I'm looking for the LIDDS here. I'm not going to talk too much about the analysis of them. I'm mostly going to be looking for them and identifying them. Mrs. Stevenson in the next video is going to come along and talk a lot about what they're meaning and how they're going to mean something for ethos, logos, and pathos, and she wraps everything up. So I'm just going to start with a tiny bit of background for you. Sojourner Truth delivered this speech at a women's convention in Ohio in 1851. She was a former slave who turned abolitionist, and she was a women's rights activist as well. So this gives us a little bit of context. First thing is I'll just read the first sentence in paragraph 1. Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. Okay, here's a couple things. Dictionally, I'm noticing use of the word children, calling her audience children. She also says racket. These are words that stand out to me. The other thing that stands out to me is this use of something out of kilter. Okay, I'm labeling this blue because her language here, right from the start, I can tell is becoming less formal. It's very informal, and that's a pretty good example of something that's informal. Remember, when we look at language, we're looking for the overall language of the piece and not just tiny words. I guess technically something out of kilter is also an idiom, which is a type of metaphor, so I'm going to also make it pink, so that's double underlined. Second sentence. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North, all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. Okay, twixt. Here's a good example again of her language. It's very informal. She's almost bringing in what we call colloquialisms, which are figures of speech that are unique to a region. In this case, the South. The white men will be in a fix. Here's another example of an idiom. And this is an idiom that gives me, again, kind of a colloquial feeling of the overall language of the piece. But what's all this here talking about? There's a very good example of what we would call a rhetorical question, a question that's not meant to be answered. And you'll remember rhetorical questions, uses of question marks can be syntax. So I'm going to make that red. Okay, let us move on to the second paragraph. That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. Okay, this is a pretty good example of detail. She's giving detail about how women are treated and a little bit of contrast to how she herself is treated. And then there's a use of an exclamation point for emphasis. That's a syntactical choice. So it's going to be red. And ain't I a woman? Look at me, look at my arm. Okay, and ain't I a woman? There's a question. So I'm going to keep that red. I'm going to just maybe circle that for emphasis. Look at me, look at my arm. We have some short sentences also for emphasis, kind of a punch as she speaks, and again with exclamation points. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could heed me, and ain't I a woman? Listen to this. I've plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could heed me, and ain't I a woman? When it happens more than twice, looking at these conjunctions, we have a type of parallelism called polysyndeton. So I'm going to label that out to the side since that's a new one for you. Make sure it shows up for you. There we go. We also have our rhetorical question, before I forget it, another one. So she said that twice. If she says, ain't I a woman again, I'm going to make note of that because that might be a good example of anaphora. I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. Some good details again. And ain't I a woman? Oh, there it is a third time. It's almost like her refrain. It's giving the speech its theme. As she repeats it, it's giving it some rhythm. So this is a type of parallel structure called anaphora. I'll label that one for you too. I have borne 13 children, and seen most all sold off to slavery, and when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me, and ain't I a woman? So again, there's our repeating refrain, anaphora, our question. Here's some good details again. This is what her life is like. Okay, I paused there to make sure I had the rest of the speech on the screen for you and left the key up at the top. So ready for paragraph 3. She begins, when they talk about this thing in the head, what's this they call it? Here's a use of semicolon, that syntax. She's taken two independent clauses and put them together, and she also has a question again. So red for those. Then a member of the audience whispers intellect, and she responds, that's it, honey. Here's another good example of language coming through. She's very informal. She's talking like she knows these people. She's one of their friends. She's not trying to sound fancy. And what's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? Here we go. Another rhetorical question. This is something she's definitely relying on throughout her speech. If my cup won't hold but a pint, and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Here's an excellent example of her using an analogy to try to prove a point. She is trying to talk about the difference between cups and pints, and who's got what and who hasn't. And it's an analogy that also happens to be a metaphor. So that's why it's going to be pink. Okay, so paragraph 4. Then that little man in black there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Okay. Here's another exclamation point. So this is syntax. She's doing it for emphasis. Okay. That little man in black there, I think that she's probably making a reference. I'm going to assume that that's some religious person, a reverend, a priest, a minister. So, we are here. Christ wasn't a woman. Let's say that's a detail. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? She only says it twice, so it's not an aphra, but she is saying it for emphasis, and it's a rhetorical question both times. Okay? From God and a woman, man had nothing to do with him. Another detail as she talks about her biblical knowledge, her religious knowledge. Paragraph 5. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. Okay. Again, exclamation point, syntax, that's the choice. She is making an allusion here towards Eve and the Garden of Eden. She was strong enough to turn the world upside down again. So I'm going to mark this allusion, just to be clear. And I'm also going to mark this metaphor, analogy, as she tries to make this point. End of paragraph 5. And now that they is asking to do it, the men better let them. The men better let them turn the world back upside down and fix it. Notice this. They is asking. That's an incorrect subject-verb agreement. So we have, again, an example of the overall language being very informal and conversational. Paragraph 6. Obliged to you for hearing me, and now old sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. Let's see. Obliged. Example of her using a specific word to seem friendly and conversational. It has the connotation that's a little bit more, is it friendly than thank you for hearing me. And now old sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. So here's another example of the overall language and the tone she's working to provide. So, if you'd like, you can watch this again. You can watch it and pause. Make sure that your sheet looks like mine. And when you're ready, move on to video 2. Mrs. Stevenson is going to talk about how we might chart these lids and talk about claim and assertion and where Sojourner Truth is using ethos, logos, and pathos, and how she's developing ethos, logos, and pathos. So please move on to video 2 when you are ready.